Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking one of the most unprecedented and frankly intensely debated regulatory events in modern tech history. We're looking back at June 2026. This was the exact moment the frontier of artificial intelligence collided head-on with federal export controls. And this matters immensely because the outcome here dictates the future of literally every app, tool, and startup that we use every single day. We're going to look at how two totally competing narratives emerged from the exact same timeline, one claiming an urgent national security crisis and the other pointing to calculated market interference. Okay, let's dive into this. $1.75 trillion. That is a staggering number, right? That was the valuation of the historic public listing for xAI and SpaceX that happened right in the middle of June 2026. Now keep that massive figure in the back of your mind, because the core question we're exploring today is this: what exactly happens when a trillion-dollar market debut perfectly intersects with a sudden global government directive that forces the industry's top competitor offline? To answer that, here's our roadmap for today's explainer. First, the Anthropic shutdown. Second, the government's official security narrative. Third, the competing IPO timeline. Fourth, structural parallels to oligarchy. And finally, the reversal and its lasting impact. Section 1. The Anthropic shutdown. The industry leader goes dark. To really wrap our heads around the gravity of this government intervention, we've got to rewind to June 9, 2026. This was the precise moment the AI competitive landscape shifted, and shifted dramatically. Anthropic released its most powerful models to date, Mythos 5, and its public-facing flagship, Fable 5. And the data from their brief 3-day release window, it was absolutely staggering. Fable 5 became the first model to break the 90% barrier on core analytical benchmarks for complex, long-running engineering and data tasks. This wasn't just some marginal, incremental update. As our source material highlights, Anthropic wasn't just keeping pace anymore. They were pulling far, far ahead in software development, specialized reasoning, and complex agentic planning. They had established a clear, undeniable technological edge. But as you probably know, that momentum did not last. Just 72 hours later, on June 12th, the Department of Commerce stepped in. They issued a sudden, unprecedented 90-minute shutdown order. This directive was sweeping, it was immediate, and it forced Anthropic to take both Mythos 5 and Fable 5 completely dark worldwide. I mean, we're talking about a total halt of the clear industry leader occurring precisely during their critical launch window. Section 2. The official security narrative. The government's stance. So how exactly did the government justify pulling the plug on the world's most advanced AI model with basically zero warning? Well, their justification came down to a specific technical term, a jailbreak vulnerability. According to the official reports, engineers over at Amazon flagged a flaw to the government showing that Anthropic's new models could be manipulated or coaxed into identifying software vulnerabilities. The big concern here was that bad actors could exploit this capability to generate potential cyber weapons. Now, Anthropic argued that these flaws were minor and actually pretty widely present in other public models already, but the government's mandate was absolutely clear. The official narrative played out in a really rapid sequence. Step 1, the vulnerability is flagged. Step 2, the Commerce Department treats it as a massive emergency and issues an urgent export control directive. Step 3, access gets heavily restricted, to the point of even blocking Anthropic's own overseas employees from using the tech. And finally, Step 4, to comply with all this, Anthropic is forced to pull the models offline entirely. So, on paper at least, it was a rapid, decisive action executed strictly under the banner of national security. Now, what's really interesting about this next slide is how it shifts the focus. Section 3, the competitor's IPO timeline, the market reality. Because the source material we're examining today presents a deeply contrasting perspective that completely reframes what happened on June 12th. We really have to view this through a dual lens. On one side, Side A, you've got the government's official press releases, citing an urgent national security emergency that required immediate containment of dangerous software. But on the flip side, Side B, the source analysis argues something very, very different. By mapping out the corporate timeline, these analysts suggest this was actually a calculated act of market interference, a maneuver designed specifically to clear the competitive field and provide a multi-billion-dollar runway for a favored competitor. So the crucial point here is how perfectly these dates align. Check this out. June 9th, Anthropic's models are released. June 12th, the sudden, forced shutdown abruptly stalls Anthropic's momentum. Then, right in mid-June, that record-breaking $1.75 trillion IPO for xAI goes through completely unimpeded, with zero immediate competitive pressure from a live Fable 5 model on the market. And finally, on June 26th, just as the IPO window officially closes, the government initiates a rollback of the ban.
To understand why this exact timeline is drawing such intense scrutiny, the source material highlights a major conflict of interest. Elon Musk, the owner of xAI, holds a prominent leadership role within the current administration, specifically in the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE. The analysis points out that having an administration-aligned competitor wielding unprecedented leverage within the exact federal apparatus that regulates the market, well, it creates a massive structural advantage. The intervention directly froze xAI's primary competitor at the exact optimal financial moment.
Section 4. Structural Parallels to Oligarchy. Analyzing the Tactics.
You see, the source material doesn't just treat this as some one-off controversy. It views it through a much broader structural lens. This quote from CNN's Fareed Zakaria really captures the sentiment perfectly. He notes, "This marks a shift toward a personalized, arbitrary, and unpredictable style of regulation. What we're examining here is a perceived departure from a traditional, rules-based market. We're looking at a scenario where sudden federal directives can fundamentally upend commercial realities literally overnight."
And the source material actually goes even further, drawing explicit, direct comparisons to autocratic systems. One voice in the text states, "Trump is turning into Putin. This is exactly the kind of crap that happens in Russia." Now, obviously the language there is pretty stark, but the analytical point being made is really about the mechanics of state power. When an administration utilizes national security apparatuses to abruptly shut down a private commercial product right at its launch window, industry watchers argue it closely mirrors the exact tactics used by state-backed oligarchic regimes.
Our source breaks these parallels down into 3 distinct tactics. Number 1, state power weaponized for corporate allies, which means using regulatory agencies and emergency bans to cripple the competitors of state-favored insiders. Number 2, arbitrary standards applied unequally, where rules are just selectively enforced to pick winners and losers in the market. And number 3, pre-release extortion of control. At the same time all this was happening, the administration pushed executive orders demanding pre-release review of powerful models, essentially forcing a partnership with the state rather than allowing for independent regulation.
And this brilliantly illustrates that unequal application of rules. Think about it. You have Anthropic facing severe targeted enforcement, a literal global blackout, over a vulnerability they argued was narrow and minor. Meanwhile, competitors like OpenAI, who the source specifically notes had identical widespread behaviors in their models, were basically entirely ignored by the Commerce Department. The analysis argues that this unequal application of the rules is the absolute hallmark of political favoritism, rather than standardized security policy.
Let's move to our final section and see how this builds. Section 5, the reversal and impact, the aftermath.
Because, as you might guess, the story didn't just end with the permanent suppression of Anthropic's models. On June 26th, exactly 2 weeks after that sudden emergency shutdown, the regulatory pressure just miraculously eased. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick issued a revision allowing roughly 100 vetted U.S. cyber firms to access the Mythos 5 model. Now, the public model, Fable 5, did remain completely offline, but this quick pivot adds massive weight to the source's market timing theory. It really suggests the initial total shutdown was kind of a blunt instrument. Once that critical mid-June IPO window had safely closed and the capital was officially secured, the emergency suddenly allowed for a limited rollback.
Which leaves us with this provocative final question to end our explainer today. Are we entering an era where sudden national security directives dictate multi-billion-dollar market winners? As the line between federal leverage and private capital continues to blur, the events of June 2026 really force us to ask whether traditional, fair market dynamics can survive when regulatory interventions perfectly align with the financial interests of administration insiders. This stuff matters for every single tool we use and every new startup being built today. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer as we unpack these sources. I highly encourage you to keep questioning the real-world impact of these structural shifts. We'll see you next time.